This was our last pick of the year, so a heck of a way to celebrate the end of harvest. So
There you go.
thank you both very much.
It's ours too today. Yeah.
We had some Petit Verdot that we picked today, so.
Oh, that's it?
That was the end of it, yeah.
A ton, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you find that adapter?
Didn't you plug it in? Oh.
That's okay. We're probably okay. Let me check my battery.
John, I don't think you will be. Why don't you?
We'll be okay. It'll ding at us.
Well, I can see we've got people joining us. It's been a while since we've done one of these Zoom things. I think that's really the reason I wanted to do this, because I just haven't done a Zoom thing in so long.
We miss it so
We
much.
really miss these. No, but it's a fantastic opportunity for us to grab three really busy people at the end of a very hectic harvest season. So for those of you I don't know who are joining us right now, I'm Marty Taucher. I'm the managing partner at Avennia. I'm sitting next to Chris Peterson, who's my partner and our winemaker at Avennia and Liminal and Lydian, and who knows what else we're up to. And then we're so fortunate to be joined by Mike and Jonathan Sauer from Red Willow Vineyard. It's such a thrill to be joining these guys, and we're doing this as a way to kind of celebrate the release of our 2018 Red Willow Cabernet, which is the first of our kind of dedicated cabs that we've done. And we started doing it in 2014, and we've done 4 vintages now. And so it just gives us a chance to celebrate that, look a little bit back on where we've been with these fine gentlemen and their esteemed vineyard. The way the agenda is going to roll is Chris is going to talk a little bit about how we got started with Red Willow, and maybe show a few pictures from our first pick there back in 2010. Talk a little bit about the dedicated cab, and then we'll ask Mike and Jonathan to kind of talk a little bit about Red Willow. They've made a few changes. They had to pull out a block of Cabernet that was planted back in '85. Talk a little bit about that. Talk about what the plans are, and then we're going to taste some wines. Taste the 4 wines. So I hope that those of you who are participating have got some of these past vintages ready. We're kind of excited to see how the 14 and the 16 vintages have come along. Those are the ones that got a little bit of age on them, and then talk about the 17 and the 18. These are wines that are great for aging. So that's the agenda. We do have a chat box. So if you want to ask questions, or you have questions for ourselves or the Sauers, or about Red Willow, or what's going on at the winery, just stick a question in the chat box, and we will look to address them during the call. So thanks guys for joining us. How you guys doing?
Good. Great. Thank you.
This is our last day of harvest, so we're celebrating with some first-class wine.
Super. So Chris, tell us about Red Willow. What happened when we decided to get this project going?
Yeah, I mean, as I learned about Washington wine and was visiting different wineries and learning about the history of it all, Red Willow, of course, figures very prominently in the history of Washington wine. And we can talk about how the first blocks planted in the early 70s, the first Syrah planting in Washington, and just how beautiful the vineyard is. So we all kind of know about Red Willow being one of these iconic vineyards in Washington. But then when I was at DeLille Cellars in 2008, we started sourcing some Cabernet and Merlot from there, and I just really liked the balance. I really liked just everything about this fruit. And so when in 2010, Marty and I started Avennia, it was the logical first step is to find this great old vine Cabernet and Merlot, and I think I heard through the grapevine that some might be available, and so I called them, and it was a great way to kind of start that Avennia style, circulating around older vines and balanced and kind of a lot of old world characteristics, And I think we were just in the right place at the right time too, because this fruit doesn't become available often. And I think we've got some of their premier blocks at that time. And so it's a great way to start.
Perfect.
I even, from back in the day, I have my vintage Red Willow vineyard hat. It's seen a few harvests at this point, about a dozen.
Can't go without the swag. That's what I always say. You need your swag. That's a beautiful hat. Great stuff. So tell us a little bit about Red Willow, the history and sort of how you got started, and specifically about these Cabernet blocks on the side of that bench, the side of that beautiful hill. I've seen so many pictures of that. Allison, you might want to throw up a picture of kind of that first harvest in 2010 while the Sauers talk about their vineyard.
Really, Red Willow goes back to a family farm. It was my wife's family farm, the Stevensons, and it's nearly a century old now. Another 5 or 6 years will be a century, so it dates way back. When I married into the family, they had quite a bit of land that Red Willow is now located on. They owned it, but it was unsuitable to grow anything really. And I was just a kid straight out of college, and my father-in-law suggested that we look at just some permanent crop, whether it's orchard or vineyard. And I really can't remember why I got so enthused about French-sounding wine grapes. It was relatively new in the state at the time, and I got associated with Dr. Walter Clore, the father of the Washington wine industry, and he located a weather station and some experimental plots on our place, and we tried 3 acres of Cabernet Sauvignon back in 1973, excuse me, and it was just a very slow experimentation with wine grapes. Shortly after we started in the late 70s, David Lake, well-known winemaker for Columbia Winery. He was a young man at the time, a master of wine, and he also consulted with the early days of DeLille, which is kind of, Chris has a connection with DeLille and with Chris Upchurch. So, and this ironically, this old 85 block of Cabernet Sauvignon that you guys had sourced these wines from came from the old Harrison Hill vineyard from that Associated Vintners owned. So it's got a connection back, and I guess today Harrison Hill is still a wine that DeLille makes, if I'm correct, Chris.
Yeah, planted in 1962.
Yeah,
it's now the oldest.
So, I mean, it's kind of odd how there's some connections with all of us going back to this early Cabernet Sauvignon vineyard. So I would say a lot of the history of Red Willow especially goes back to David Lake. He had a real influence on myself, and I know he did on Chris Upchurch, and I'm sure Chris had an influence on you, Chris, of this concept of terroir, that the wines reflect the land that they're grown on. He had a very European perspective. He wanted to make classic wines, classic blends, of which you're very much doing yourself. And the wines that have more structure identify with the site. They're not just totally overripe, and they're just pleasant overripe wines. They're wines that reflect the site that they came from. And of course, David Lake was one of the first to come up with vineyard designation, to where the wines are identified by the sense of place, of which, once again, you guys are doing this. So this happens to be a picture of when I speak of terroir, basically the underlying soil that this 85 block would be layers of sandstone, volcanic pumice. There's some gravel. These are above the flood levels of the ancient Missoula floods of 15,000 to 20,000 years ago. So they're a little bit higher elevation vineyards. very, very poor soils. The topsoil has a little bit of clay to it. So it gives you a very lean wine in that, I shouldn't say lean, it has a lot of structure to it, a fair amount of tannin, but I think the calcium content of the soil kind of gives elegance and elegance to the tannins. That's one of the hallmarks of Red Willow at whatever wines that you're trying is the mouthfeel of the tannins is very unique. And anyway, and I think I pride myself and the family prides itself on Red Willow has a very generational viewpoint of this farm. It's like in the early days of the wine industry, you had a lot of farmers that were involved, the Hogues, the Mercers, the Balcom and Moe. Our farm were basically successful farms that got into wine grapes, fell in love with it. And I mean, more recent history, I mean, you have all kinds of occupations involved with the wine industry, but we like quite a few others. We're basic farmers of the soil, and we treated it like another crop, but we fell in love with it. So I would represent the third generation on this farm. John would be the fourth, and some of his kids, and I've got another son and son-in-law, and some of their kids are involved also out here in the summer work. And in fact, John's boy has made 5 gallons of wine the other day. So, and so it's something that I hope there's a continuity to the generations, and it's kind of more of a European model rather than we have 80 acres of grapes and then we'll sell it someday.
Well, that legacy is certainly paid off.
David Lake, being a master wine, had a lot of influence on you too, Dad. Just trying to really an old world approach, and when you go out to the vineyard, it definitely has that feel. And just this kind of little rock walls and a lot of little small blocks, and you would often try to match, because it was really unknown when you planted the first grapes. There was about 6 wineries in the state at the time. Mm-hmm. So it was really, they had to discover a lot of things, and a lot of times the hard way, probably, right?
Absolutely.
And just to try to match, well, Cabernet, I think maybe we should put it on this hill, and then you put Merlot, the 85 Merlot you guys get, just on the other side of the hill on the east side. And, they're all, but they're so unique. That's one thing about Red Willow, is so much diversity of not only varieties, but soils and aspects and just everything. So, yeah, anyway.
Now, that's one of the incredibly unique things about Red Willow is, we sourced from many different vineyards, and there's different elevations and there's some different aspects, but they're sometimes largely just in these kind of a little bit somewhat more uniform. So Red Willow is kind of it's kind of 2 small hills, and the grapes go all the way around them, and so that you have the different soils. You have literally grapes facing every direction, and a lot of steeper slopes, which I think allows for really advantageous sun exposure, a little bit more poor soils, which is helpful for grapes, and just a lot to choose from. And the difference, the fact that you could grow great Merlot across the road from great Cabernet, well, there's a lot more going on than just because they're so far apart. But
yeah, if I could add a little, so the 2 blocks you get, the 85 and the Merlot, they're on this peninsula hill, what we call it, the peninsula. And back 12,000 years ago during the Lake Missoula floods, it literally was a peninsula jutting out of the Atanum Ridge because of its high elevation. So you have these ancient soils, but you go down, about a bottom third of the vineyard would have been impacted by the floods. And just to show the attention to detail Chris has, he would have us a lot of times pick that separate, even sometimes up to a week later or whatnot, the top from the bottom. And there is a lot of differences. So
Yeah, you're walking down there and you're tasting the grapes, and then you'll hit the spot like, well, that doesn't taste quite as ripe. And these canopies are bigger because there's more water down there, and it's a little bit different. And so
that's the double-edged sword of farming on some of these steep hillsides. There is more variability to the soil, little bit of the ripeness. So it's either split picking it, keeping it separated. And there's times when we picked the top of that hill and it looked like we were picking huckleberries instead of grape clusters. They're just maybe six berries on a cluster.
yeah.
And so anyway, Chris has really worked at making this wine, and he's done it quite well.
Well, we were thrilled, when in the winemaking process, I remember, boy, this would have been 2012 or 2000, probably 2013. No, it would be 15 or 16 when we had the 14 in barrel. Chris kind of pulls out a flask or pulls out a beaker and says, here, you got to really taste this cab. I think it is so good, it deserves to stand on its own. And that's where our Red Willow Cab. And so, our production's not huge. I mean, for Avennia, we're between 3,500 and 4,500 cases a year. And so, our big red wine is Sistina. And then we also have Gravura. And I know that the Red Willow Cab and Merlot have made it into Sistina consistently. And so for us to take, 4 or 5 barrels out of the Sistina wine and want to break it out and do dedicated shows that Chris was really impressed with just the uniqueness of that particular block and the uniqueness of that particular wine. And so we were thrilled to be able to help you guys kind of carry that 85 block along as long as we possibly could. And then finally, it kind of finally gave up the ghost, I guess, is the way of putting it, with that 19 vintage. And but we're super excited about the 91 block now, because it's kind of right next door, isn't it? Pretty close.
Yeah, if I could elaborate a little bit on the demise of the 85 block, it had leaf roll virus. It did from the very beginning. And a leaf roll virus is, it's not good. What happens in September and early October, the leaves start turning this beautiful scarlet red, and it makes for great Halloween leaves to decorate everything with. It's beautiful, but yet your photosynthesis slows way down. It does not hurt too much, but it slows the ripening, and in some ways it gives you a longer hang time. And we had a whole series of pretty hot years in a row there where good hot vintages, we could ripen it just fine. Gradually, Columbia used to have this vineyard, and the yields just started getting lower and lower, struggled to ripen. They wanted higher tonnages and riper fruit, and it just would not do that. And that's why we went to you guys. We went to Bob Betts on some of these old blocks, hillside blocks, and said, we'll probably crop it down way low, like 2 tons per acre. Well, commercially, you just cannot do that. It's just too low. But yet it'll make very intense special wines on these hot vintages. In 2019, we came along, we had a bigger crop generally across the board I think most of the state did, a little bit bigger crop. And then we had the super, super early frost in 1st of October, and then about the 12th or 14th of October, a good part of the state got dinged, and it just would not ripen. And of course, it would not make wines to your standards whatsoever. It wasn't ripe enough to make wine out of. So right after that, we decided to combine with the leaf roll, and it's time to take it out. And the year before, you guys, we saw it coming. It was going to be a matter of this year, next year, or 3 years from now. You guys moved into the adjoining block. It's a 91 block on the very same, slightly a little bit more of a south slope. And personally, I think it's a better block than the 85 block as far as the potential quality. Now, whether it turns out that way or not, who knows? But it's an excellent block. And we sourced the Cabernet material from a different source. I think it's still clone 8, but it did not have the degree of leaf roll virus, and it'll ripen more normally. So I don't know, personally, I think perhaps the future looks better. It's hard to say that with these fabulous wines in front of us, but I think the potential is there to even get better. So guys basically moved next door to potentially a better block. We did rip out the old 85 block. We've since planted it to Syrah. It's a little bit earlier ripening variety, and we've Red Willow is a lot of its reputation is tied to Syrah also, and so and it's already up on the wire, and it looks good for the future. That block, it's interesting, Chris, when we took the vineyard out and you get it down to bare ground, you see what the soils look like. And I remember David Lake talking about old Cote Roties. They called one part a brunette and one part a blonde. There's kind of a ancient story about Cote Roti, but there's definitely a difference in the soil types of that 5-acre block of the 85 that you source this from.
Yeah, and that was, I mean, the leaf roll, like you said, it slows down ripening. So, and I think it makes kind of more of an old world style. I mean, we think about it, but I thought it played into our style quite well. But you know, at some point, it just keeps, it's a progressive situation. But in 2019, it was really fortunate that you did have couple acres of the 91 block there, so we could just go right into that, and that's been great. In fact, stay tuned for 2019 Red Willow Cab. It's already in bottle, and they'll feature this new block. So that will be interesting as we go to, you know, future verticals and hopefully in-person tastings. Not
I see Allison has a picture up on the screen of loading the compost up. A little bit about the cultural practices of Red Willow. We're not organic per se, but we do an awful lot of green practices. We don't use herbicide. We've used compost for a number of years. We try to get around to each of our blocks about every 3 to 4 years, banding compost right in the row. And we do a number of practices that deal with the biology of the soil, and that to me, I think that's a very important part of farming grapes is treating the soil right, having a soil that's alive.
That's great. Are you doing the same spacing and everything with the Syrah? Are you moving the rows a little closer, or same? Like, what are you changing?
You know, Marty, maybe it's more me. John and I go around about this. He would like to be even closer than I would, but we've typically been 10 foot by 6 foot spacing over the years. And when we rip a vineyard out, you don't want to replant in the same rooting zone. The old roots, as hard as you try to, you'll still have roots left in the ground, and they tend to repel each other, and you don't get a good take. So ideally, we move, if it's a 10-foot row, we move 5 foot.
Oh, that makes sense.
It's like with drip irrigation, basically you've got about a 3.5 foot wetting zone. And if you get out in the middle of the row, it's essentially completely dry. And so if you move over 5 feet, you're almost starting over new soil again. We have gone from 6 foot to 5 foot spacing. I still like the results. A number of years ago, we tried 4 foot spacing, 4 by 9.5, and personally, I'm not as crazy about the 4 foot and the 6 foot is a little bit too wide. I'll grant you that. Okay. We go to about 9.5 by 5 foot spacing.
Okay.
Now, if you got poorer soil, perhaps, but
And then some of our newer plantings, I think how we prep the soil, we do a little ripping right ahead before we plant. So it's just trying to open it up deeper, especially if you have a hard pan. We have such poor soils, and we're always trying to build them and build the biology. So we'll dip the roots in mycorrhiza, try to get all the bacteria working for it and everything. So there's a lot of things that you didn't do originally back in the day. You just dug a hole and put them in, but the vines did all right and they thrived, but some of the cultural practices have gotten better as well. So
this picture that was on the screen there that just went away was the picture of the 91 block that you're now sourcing the Red Willow Cab fruit from. It's a beautiful vineyard. It slopes to the west. That's Mount Adams in the background. That's to the west. The rows run east and west, which I vastly prefer that. You have less sunburn problems on an east-west row than a north-south row. There's more gravel to this particular vineyard than the 85 block. I think it's probably our best Cabernet block, and it's getting older now. In 91, what's 2001? That's 30-year-old vineyard now, so it would be considered
it's older than the 85 block was when we started getting that stuff.
Yeah.
Right. So
yeah,
it's a beautiful site, and the fruit is great off there. And again, the yields are still low, so we're getting an intense concentration. That's better than the 85.
Especially this year. It was unmercifully low this year.
Yeah.
So you're saying we're trading up, basically? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
That's good.
Well, we should, these were great. In fact, it was 2010, we got this. We combined it with some fruit from Bacchus and Dionysus vineyard to make the Bordeaux blend Sestina. And then also Bravura at that point. And as we've grown, those vineyards for Bravura and our other wines have expanded, but Sestina has always stayed between these two sites. And it was in 2012, a winemaker friend of mine would come and taste the barrels of the 2012 Red Willow Cab. It's like, this is the best barrel sample cab I've ever had from Washington. And we weren't far enough along where I felt like we could do a standalone cab. But I wish I would have bottled a couple cases for the cellar. But in 2014, again, another great Cabernet year. It was like, let's give this a try. We had enough acreage to have enough barrels to do this and still make the Sestina. So that was the first year we did that. Should we try it?
Yeah, should we try it? Let's jump in. Thank you for that fantastic overview and detailed information about the vineyard. It's always fun to hear, and I've always so much enjoyed the connection that the viticulturalists and the vineyard owners have with their land, and the way they nurture it and support it and bring it along and really do all the wonderful things that need to be done to create amazing fruit. Being a new vineyard owner ourselves, it's kind of a steep learning curve for us as we take on Taptile and figure out what to do with our little 24 acres there. But it's a journey that I'm looking forward to. And I just took a lot of notes about what you just said. So actually, I'm going to rewatch this recording and going to say, hey,
in 40 years, this is what we're going to be facing.
Anyway.
Well, Red Willow is it's one of the most, you saw that picture. That's a beautiful picture. It's one of the most, one of the very most beautiful vineyards in the state. And because it's the closest to Seattle, it's usually the first one I hit. So I've usually gone over the pass, it's raining, I'm gone through the Badlands between Yakima and Ellensburg or whatever, and I land there, and it's just like, I'm out in the vineyards now, and it's just beautiful. It's usually, 9 o'clock in the morning by the time I get there, and a little crisp in the fall, and it's just a great start to the day looking at vineyards.
Yeah, I see Allison brought up a picture. I mean, it's obviously zoomed in, but but we are relatively close to the foothills of the Cascade Mountain Range. We're the farthest west vineyard of the Yakima Valley appellation. We don't see Mount Rainier, but we do see Mount Adams. We only see the top of it because we're relatively so close. The foothills block quite a bit of it. But it's a pretty amazing area. The sagebrush, an absolute desert. In fact, I think we are one of the driest of the wine regions. We're probably in the 6-7 inches of precipitation a year, and that's melting down the snow in the wintertime. And a number of the storms will kind of go around us. We're relatively less windy than perhaps the Columbia Gorge or the Horse Heavens. We don't get quite as hot as some of the real hot regions of the state. But yet I think because of our proximity to a Tandem Ridge, our nights are a little bit cooler, or a little bit warmer, excuse me. A little bit warmer. There's always a slight air movement happening. And I think our temperatures probably stay more in the sweet spot of where grapes want to be. If you get down below 50 degrees, they pretty well shut down. If your nights drop too low, they kind of stop and start over again. And so even though we're not as hot a site as a lot of Eastern Washington, we're a fairly early site relatively. We're not very far behind Red Mountain, which is a fairly early vineyard site. This is a beautiful picture. At times we'll get this hoar frost on the vines. You barely see Mount Adams peeking through, but and we're not bitter cold. I mean, but yet in the springtime, a lot of times we're maybe 10 days later than most of Eastern Washington coming out of bud break because of a lot of times snow in the foothills of the Cascades. And we stay cool a little bit later in the springtime, but somehow we gradually catch up. But in fact, this is a picture from the 91 block where you're sourcing from now. It's just, that's my favorite time of photography, is when the hoarfrost is on the vines and some of the low clouds are settling in. It's a beautiful time of year.
Spectacular. Well, what do you think about the 2004? What did you pour first? 14?
Yes, it's the 2014. That's why we're really here, right?
Yeah,
To
really.
try some of this wine. The 2014 was a pretty warm year, but pretty consistent. I mean, pretty. You sent me the.
Did you get that I sent you?
Yeah. So, geez, yeah, like among the warmer, you have 3,300 heat units. For reference, 2015, one of our hottest years, was a little over 3,400. So it was a warm year. They've all been warm to some extent, I guess with the exception of 2019, which still wasn't cool, but it was. But 2019 was cool in the fall. That was the hard part. But 2014, very warm year. I find the wines overall have a lot of structure and a lot of ageability.
Do you speak, or do you think it's got more time?
I think it has more time, but it's as we go forward, it's a wine that would definitely, one you could enjoy now. Whereas as we get into 2017 and 18, these are wines that are designed to have time, as Mike and Jonathan were saying. There's just a lot more structure, a little more structure based and less overt fruit based from a lot of Red Willow blocks, and especially the older blocks. And that's what drew me to them. Washington wine is always going to have an amount, a good amount of fruit, but I think the sites that kind of have more of a balance of fruit and non-fruit character are more interesting and kind of more fit with what we're trying to do. So I think that's where this fits great. The Red Willow fruit kind of forms this backbone to Sestina. But in the best years, and now this is not only, all from this vineyard, but it's specific barrels from this vineyard. different different barrel producers, and just literally taking this great combination of 4 barrels.
Wait, Chris, this is just drinking fabulous. I tried it right before we went on the air, and it's incredible. It's right at its prime.
Mm-hmm.
And I admire what you guys are trying to do. And that's very hard to make a single vineyard designated wine with one variety, all Cabernet Sauvignon, and one block of fruit. This is pretty incredible how you made this wine.
It has to be a special block in order to do it. You can't do it with everything. And we have other blocks that go into great wines that are just, even I would say your Red Willow Merlot, the 85 planting across the way. We don't make a single block of that, but that is integral to the Sestina wine. And I go through this every year. It just fits so well and creates such a mouthfeel that makes, I think, the Sestina unique, even though maybe it doesn't want to be just a single block wine. But I think, this can do both, because I think it's just a pretty singular wine.
And we've had a really good response to it. I mean, it's, it tends to be something that, our club members tend to wait for this release. We wait, this is the last of the vintage that we always, we hang on to this one a good 4 months, 5 months longer than we do the Sestina, just to give it a little more time to mature in the bottle. And it's kind of proven, that we can do unique little things like this and still create enough excitement among our customers that it makes it worthwhile doing. Absolutely. And, we're not afraid to try new things every once in a while.
I think it's pretty typical of Red Willow. It takes a while to open up. Oftentimes you have it the next day and it's like way better 2 days later. They're wines to age, and it really shows it. This is great.
Yeah.
Well done.
I don't know if you decanted it, Chris, but I decanted all these right before we did this, and that's
Okay.
It's
Yeah. So that's a good practice on Red Willow wines.
Yeah. These younger Cabernets, they'll age. I mean, the David Lake wines age, 30 years.
Yeah, for some reason, I think it was because of the vintage, we didn't do it in 15. We just didn't feel that the wines were singular enough to pull out and do a single bottling of the Red Willow. We're pretty happy with the Sestina and the Gravera from that vintage.
Yeah.
Those were good wines, but I don't think you felt
Maybe I made a mistake.
Maybe you did, but you never make mistakes, Peterson. Come on.
I admire you for doing that. I mean, it's that much more special. If it's not up to a standard,
Yeah.
make it.
Cool. So what do you know about the 16 vintage? And we're welcome to take questions. You guys are being shy out there. I haven't seen a single question come up. Come on, Bill Davis. I know you can do something. Come on, give us a question here.
What do we got? 16. 16 was kind of this. I thought, from a weather standpoint and the conditions, it was almost perfect. The yields were a little bit elevated, not a lot, but they were above average. But I think the wines are just outstanding across board. I think it's one of our very, very good Washington vintages.
Chris, of these 4 wines, it was not a high yield, but it was the highest of the 4 vintages that we're trying. It was a 2 3/4 ton per acre yield.
Yeah.
Let's see.
It's a little cooler than.
We had many rain episodes through the year. I mean, for Yakima Valley, you would laugh at when we say rain episodes. We'll get a 1/4 of an inch, and that's significant. But we had more rain through the season. Had one real hot spell in July. June was cool, so it was a little bit of a roller coaster as far as the heat and the moderate temperatures. And I think the rain and the more precipitation gave us a little bit bigger crop, but it's good vintage.
Yeah, and that was across the board too. In years like 2016, and growers call and say, hey, we need more bins. We filled all yours and there's still more fruit. Whereas this year, empty bins come back to us. Like, that's what we had. We still had extra bins at the end. It's 2020 and 2021. So there was a little more fruit, but the quality is great. I think, this has a little more elegance, but it also has that firm red willow structure there, I think.
Yeah.
And just starting to open up. We opened these a couple hours ago, opened them for the guys in the cellar to try, and so we could just make sure they're all sound, and before I brought them over to Marty's house. But yeah, we're on our last day of harvest. Well, our last crush day is tomorrow. We'll take the last of our fruit today. About 140 tons in, so.
Between us and Pastor Tom.
Yeah.
What are you pulling in? What's your last thing?
This is Cab Franc from Shampoo.
Oh, wow.
It's traditionally, it's come in later.
Great.
It probably crossed 25 bricks just recently. So
Wow,
After the success of the Red Willow Cabernet, we decided to do a vineyard specific Cab Franc from Shampoo, and that wine's been very well received by our club and our customers. So those are kind of our two. I mean, Arnaud doesn't really count because we've always done Syrah as a single varietal out of that Boucher vineyard. But
yeah, but these are ones that make just enough for
around 100 cases.
Yeah.
That's about all we can do.
Yeah.
I'm just glad I don't have to sell a lot of them through, out of state distribution channels, because it's nice to be able to have these wines available for our customer base locally and our club members. It's great.
Yeah, I think, Marty, that's part of the education of the wine consumers of Washington too. Is Bob Betts has done this. You make them from different regions, and when they're specific wines, it almost starts revealing gradually over the decades what characteristics different regions or vineyards have, and that's a special way of doing it. I appreciate you doing that.
Well, anytime I'm mentioned in the same sentence with Bob Betts, I think I'm okay with that. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I taste this Cabernet. I'm like, this is great Washington Cabernet. It's got structure, but most of all, it's got red willowness. I mean, it's kind of that, structured, kind of more red fruits than super dark black fruits, and a nice fresher note. And you just think you could age it forever. It has kind of a lot of old world sensibility,
Mm-hmm.
This next wine was probably the first of many wines that broke what I call the odd year curse. And that our wines, so for whatever reason, the 10, the 12, the 14, and the 16 seems to be better received than our 11, our 13, and our 15 vintage wines. And then along came 17 and the Red Willow. I go, Chris, we're not doing the 17 Red Willow because of the odd year. Says, oh no, we're doing the 17.
I kind of had the opposite. Of course, I'm going back a few more decades, Marty. The 81, the 83, the 91, those were fabulous vintages for Red Willow, and they were all odd. And the even ones back in the 80s seemed like they were good out of the gate, but they faded, well, quickly. I shouldn't say quickly. In 10 years, they were fading. Whereas, now you try to pull out a really old vintage, and it's one of those 83s, 85s. The odd years were good back in the 80s.
Well, I can only speak to my reference point, which my life started in 2009 in the wine business when I was an intern with Peterson. So that's my context here, but I certainly can respect yours as well, my friend. So no problem there.
Yeah, 2017 was an interesting year. We had kind of that high layer of smoke that I think it wasn't close to the vineyard, but it kind of lowered the amount of sun that we got in certain ways, and actually maybe helped keep what could have been a pretty inconvenient heat wave in early September from being quite as hot, if I remember right.
Chris, I have in my notes, it was extremely hot that late August, early September, and as you mentioned, things were moving way too quickly. September 13th, and we did have overcast smoke that year. And September 13th, it just completely shut off as far as the heat units. And it was, I mean, you had sunshine, you didn't have frost, but you did not have any heat anymore the rest of the season. And that was one of the most contrasting falls. I've often talked about the magic of Washington is September and October. And we just turned cool September 14th from then on. And on my notes, the 17 you picked October 20th. This is the latest of any of these 4 wines that you picked. So there's a lot more hang time to this wine.
Wow.
I think this is a beautiful wine. It's
showing really nice.
This is elegant. This is beautiful. Yeah, I agree with that. While we're doing this wine, we did get a question or two. Let me just take this first one. How much variance in the percentage of varietals have you chosen in your blending from year to year? I guess that's kind of a blending question.
In this wine, 0%, 100% from this block.
And then like Sistina has always been a kind of a cab heavy blend, anywhere between 70 up to 77, 78% cab, and then some little more Merlot than Cab Franc. Gravura, I don't want to say Gravura is kind of the same formula because it's not, but it's usually a balanced blend between the Cab and the Merlot, and 40
more Cabernet than Merlot.
Yeah, and then Cab Franc is kind of a smaller percentage. And then the rest of the varietals are, Cabernet, Syrah is 100%. Gustine does change quite a bit depending on it. That's our Southern Rhone blend for those of you out there. Grenache, Mourvedre, and Syrah. And so, but I think Sistina has moved more to be, so we can call it a Cabernet, but it is still Bacchus, Dionysus, and Red Willow. Those are the 3 vineyards.
It's hard. It's a Bordeaux blend.
Yeah. And that will stay consistent. We also got another question in here about when are we going to do a Red Willow Syrah?
That's your decision, Marty.
As soon as that chapel block becomes available, we're in. I mean,
if you're patient, that one that we took the 85 block out of for Cabernet.
You got first dibs.
We got first dibs on that replanted 85. We'll be around, so we'll definitely be in the loop on that. That's for sure. Thanks for those questions. Those are great questions. And so 17. So the 18 was just released last weekend, right? And did you refresh mine, or did I?
Nope, this is 17.
Okay. Yeah, you're pretty sneaky. You can do stuff right in front of me.
I can't sneak it past these people though, because it goes right in front of us.
He's got more information on what we're doing than we do. I mean, that's impressive.
I've inhaled a lot of carbon dioxide the last 6 weeks, so a little slow on the uptake. So 2018, as Marty was talking about the even vintages for whatever reason, it just turned into like a blockbuster. Just like everything went right. Right? People ask how to define the growing season, and I think a lot of us are like, I don't know. It's just kind of all right. I mean, what do you? I mean, I'm sure you have more details, but I kind of just remember just a beautiful summer, and then just like staying really nice out, but cooling off slowly throughout September and October. And
in my notes, Chris, I've got it was another dry year like we've had this year through the season, quite dry. We dealt with just a lot of dust. It was just hot and dry and dust. I shouldn't say hot. It was really one of the more moderate of the total heat units for the year. It was not a cool year. And in my notes, in a different place I had, it was one of the most perfect fall seasons that we had. It was not too hot in the early stages. We did not freeze. It was just a totally pleasant fall harvest.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of times when we're visiting with winemakers, I mean, it's just hypothetical and it's not specific wines, but you talk about, well, what do you think is one of the best vintages of the decade? And almost always 18 is mentioned. It's just, and this is general, I'm not necessarily speaking of these wines, but 18 was a really good vintage, as was 17, but 18 I think is mentioned more times than not.
Yeah, I think we had slightly lower yields. We had that perfect weather. I just remember 3 weeks of just like in the mid 80s at the end of August, early September. Then it just like clicked down to, you know, mid to high 70s with lows in the 50s for another 2 weeks. And then it just went down to, you know, highs in the high 60s and lows in the low 50s. And so everything could just kind of, and no real rain episodes that I remember. It was just, and then the grapes could just get that hang time and pick them. And, you know, and that's all well and good. It makes it a fun harvest or whatever compared to how some of them can be. But the wines have backed it up. Colors, we noticed right away, colors were off the chart. Concentration, structure. It's just like, these are just brilliant Washington wines across the board. And so why wouldn't we make a single block of Red Willow, 33-year-old vine stuff. So I think this is, we only opened this a couple hours ago. I think I'll take this back into the winery. We're going to celebrate our last day of crush. Marty's going to, we have a smoker out there now. Marty's going to make us a brilliant lunch, and we're going to finish off harvest in style.
No pressure.
No pressure. That part won't be on Zoom, so you don't.
I'll get a few.
And I think we'll keep enjoying these, and I think they'll be tasting great tomorrow. But
Yeah, this is fantastic. I mean, all four of these are great. It's fun to taste the 14 with a little more length on it, a little more integrated tannins, a little more softness and flushness to it, which is really cool. And then the rest of these other three are wines that are going to really be beautiful, as they mature down the road. So
it has such a depth and concentration and
just the color,
the finish.
I appreciate you guys doing this and including us. This it makes me go back through my notes, reflect on the different vintages, what it was like, and it's interesting to see how the winemaker and the site is the same, but the influence of the seasons, what that does. I mean, there's a common fingerprint to all of these wines. They're all excellent wines, but the vintages is really coming through on these wines.
Yeah.
And in a way, that's why we drink wine. It's also time in a bottle. I mean, it's what happened that year.
Absolutely. I think that's what's interesting about it, and the fact that it's also a very specific site in this case, but in any case, in any wine, the different years, and people talk about Washington sometimes that our vintages are all similar or something, and I disagree quite a bit. I mean, these are quite different wines, and I think interesting to go back and see how they're aging.
Yeah. So, we got a couple questions. I think we've kind of covered the wines and everything. I mean, we would, it's easy to say that if you guys hadn't agreed to work with us from the day one, we probably wouldn't be where we are today. And so we can't thank you guys enough for kind of trusting myself and Chris because you guys have a lot of people who want your fruit, and we're thrilled to get it. And, we'd be remiss if we didn't say your Sauvignon Blanc is a beautiful component to our Olean Sauvignon Blanc white wine, which is consistently, fantastic year to year. So thank you for that. Very heartfelt. Thank you for that. And we look forward to working together, for a long, long time. So keep up the good work, gentlemen. And we will try to do our best on our side as well.
It's our honor and pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, and we're almost done. We're getting, you guys are done. We got a couple more weeks.
Yeah, we got a couple of weeks to get through, but the last grapes are, I have to alert my staff. The next grapes are coming in an hour and finish up tomorrow.
That's great. Let me see. Oh, one more question before we go. How did you decide that Red Willow goes into Sistina versus vineyard designated? Do you have different parts of the blocks kept separate?
Yeah, we do keep the blocks separate, the upper and the lower. When we pick them separately, even if we don't pick them, we pick them on the same day. I ask them to label the bins differently, and we keep them separate. And they're different. That lower part has usually more color, a little more fruit, but the tannins aren't quite as fine and silky as the top. And the top has all the structure and I think just maybe a little more concentration. So we keep them separate, and I've done it where we blend just a little bit of that lower block to give it a little more color and richness. It's also a blend of different barrels. We might get 12 or 13 or 14 barrels of this site, and we need a certain amount for Avennia, for the Sistina, which is one style. But what we do is I'll literally, instead of just taking the best barrels, I take this best combination that I do the different combinations and to make a, kind of a complete wine for that one.
With that,
Yeah.
thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks everyone, and thanks Mike and John.
Enjoy your relaxation time now that everything's done. I'm sure there's absolutely nothing to do now that the crop is all.
Yeah.
You guys can just take the next month off, go to Hawaii. We'll be here slaving away.
Thank you for the wine too.
Thank you.
Yeah, enjoy that.
You bet.
Thank you.
And we'll see you soon. Thank you so much. Thanks everybody who participated and joined in. We look forward to seeing you guys down the road at our tasting room. We hope to have a holiday event for our club members, and enjoy the fall. See you soon. Thanks.